So it seems the Adeptus Custodes bikes are back with a vengeance. Let's talk about the Golden Bikers swooping onto a tabletop near you in the not too distant future. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Custodes, and given the big recent boost that they got in the balanced data state, I thought it could be interesting to talk about the Vertus Praetors, and what looks to be their return in style to Warhammer 40k. In the lore, the Vertus Praetors are the Imperial jet bikes of the Adeptus Custodes. The Dawn Eagle bikes are one of the many exotic relics that the Custodes can still field, where generally the technology of jet bikes has long since been lost to the rest of the Imperium. For the Custodes though, these marvels of technology act as the eyes and ears of their shield hosts, boasting advanced sensors and relaying information back to the commanders, though when the time comes to strike they're more than capable of doing so, having all the awesome Auramite armour that Custodes are well known for, some serious firepower capable of levelling enemy battle tanks in the salvo launchers or blistering hurricane bolters, all followed up with a charge from their interceptor lancers. As miniatures go for the Custodes, I do find them quite fun ones. When they first came out I got some of these just literally to paint them up. I just quite like the overall balance of them, and particularly the stylized front of them with that great big eagle on it. I did go with modelling the lances held downwards as if they're going for a charge though, just as I didn't fancy transporting them while they're pronging up like that, and also did go for magnetising the flight stems as well. So perhaps a little bit more work for me compared with some of Games Workshop's other kits. In any case, for getting points on the board, Custodes do generally tend to be a bit better than most of Games Workshop's other offerings, around about 3.6 points per dollar for these guys, and I feel like most Custodes players will have a fair amount of them built up in their collections already. They were rather strong in 9th edition, and have been in just about every Custodes discount box, bar the most recent Combat Patrol at least. As ever though, if you were looking to pick up some of these guys, feel free to check out the affiliate links down in the video description. Places like Wargame Portal in the USA for 15% off Warhammer, or Element Games in the UK for the same. Anything that's bought through any of these does go to help support the channel a little bit, and doesn't cost you anything extra if you were ordering in something anyway. In 10th edition though, the Vertus Praetors have been having a rather hard time of it. I feel like their stat lines weren't intrinsically bad, they would just have to have a points cost that was far closer to the more normal on-foot Custodes, but I think it maybe didn't help that they just didn't feel like they had an enormously different role versus the on-foot Custodes to some extent. One of the big differences between previous editions and this one is the change to the fly keyword with mounted things, meaning that 12-inch movement doesn't add quite as much as it used to, as you usually have to go around ruined terrain, as going up and over takes too much movement. It just means that while they're fast, they don't actually tend to be outstripping infantry that can go through ruined walls by quite as much as you might expect. In any case though, Games Workshop has changed their stats really quite significantly recently. They put their points costs up to 75 points per model, so you can now field either 150 points per 2 bikers or 225 per 3. Compared with their old points cost of 70, that's a plus 7% increase. They did get an improved stat line though, and 2 other special abilities. Their stat line took them from toughness 6 with 4 wounds to toughness 7 with 5. Really quite a big and chunky profile. The toughness 6 to toughness 7 won't matter against all that many profiles. I guess just strength 6, strength 7 and strength 12 under normal circumstances. But I feel like the going from 4 wounds to 5 is particularly nice, really good for damage to weapons, where they won't fall into destroying them quite as neatly. For a comparison of their previous and their new defensive profiles weighted per points, against these damage profiles we've got mortal wounds, plasma guns, a strength 10 damage 3 shot and a las cannon attack. It does seem that the new profile fairly consistently wins out. Out of these ones, the only one that the old one will actually be ahead on is the damage 3 attack, given that you still need the same amount of those, but the older profile was cheaper, but basically they're better by around about 16 to 40% or so, being particularly more impressive against the plasma gun, due to that damage 2 into 5 wounds, and the las cannon where you both get hit by the -1 to wound that it gets, and having slightly less chance to kill a biker outright. Despite the big toughness increase, I'd still rate them as a bit easier to kill versus say Custodian Guard and Wardens, at least when weighted point per point. The Wardens have durability as their entire thing, and the Custodian Guard have kind of similar wound counts per point, but you have it divided over more profiles, so you're a bit more likely to get a bit of overkill. Next up, for their ranged weapons, both their salvo launchers and hurricane bolters got really quite a big increase, and basically the choice is whether or not you want a few fairly solid anti-tank style shots to chip into enemy heavies, or you'd rather have some close range horde clearance, which could be pretty good for clearing away with those interceptor lancers. The salvo launchers really got a nice increase. Previously they were 1 shot each at strength 9, AP 2 and damage 3, only really good for chipping into killing a couple of elite infantry. They really didn't do all that much against tanks at all, which was a bit disappointing, given that they were one of the only things that might have had a chance to take down tanks at range in the core codex. Now though, with their new profile, they get 1 attack each still, but strength 10, AP 3 and damage d6 plus 1, and they also gains the twin linked keyword as well. That means that they're going to be wounding tanks 3 out of 4 times, more likely to go through the armour and hitting with more damage when they get there. And if you fired them at a toughness 10 vehicle with a 3+ save, previously they would have been doing more like 1 failed save every 2 rounds on average, whereas now per round with average rolling it's roughly like 7 wounds or so, though obviously really quite swingy depending on the exact amount of failed saves and how well you roll on those d6s. They at least have some chance though to spike high and take down some small vehicles or leave them crippled. The Hurricane Bolters also got a big boost as well. They get 6 shots each at 9 inches with twin links, or 3 shots out to 18. They now strike at strength 4, AP 1 and damage 2, rather than strength 4, AP 0 and damage 1, so a bit more akin to things like Guardian Spears now. For say 2 bikers that got within 9-inch range of their targets, they'd kill around about 7 or 8 horde targets like termagants, or around 4 intercessors out of cover. The damage 2 makes them pretty murderous against standard size Space Marines. Definitely feels that helps them out against the sort of targets that their Interceptor Lancers are best against as well. A bunch of 2-wound infantry models. Custodes do tend to be just generally good at killing those across the board though. Overall, between the two of these, I feel like there's good arguments you could make for either of those. There's both genuinely good value in a few extra shots thrown the way of enemy heavy hitters, and also being able to blast an enemy screen dead before you can charge. Then though, their main event of damage certainly still feels like it's in melee. Their Interceptor Lances get 5 attacks each, hitting on 2s at strength 7, AP 2 and damage 2, but with the Lance keyword for a +1 to wound on the charge. And they do get Martial Qatar on top of that, generally making more sense to go for the sustained hits than the lethal hits, as it's basically the same or better against pretty much all targets. For 2 bikers to 150 points charging, you kill around about 8 horde models, around 5 or 6 slain Space Marines, 2 Terminators, or like 7 wounds to a 3+ save vehicle or 5 wounds to a 2+ save one. Those ones just being rough averages of course, but in general it's just a really general purpose profile. You're going to take a chunk out of pretty much anything in the game. Finally though, and the last big improvement that they got were to their special rules. Turbo Boost still gives them a 6-inch to advances, which is some okay use. I'd say this one's probably best for being able to get them into midfield ruins perhaps, when you need to move 8 inches to jump from one piece of cover straight round to the next one, and hopefully get them up the board without being shot. Advancing can just be a bit painful though when you've already got quite a lot of speed already, and it's going to stop you doing all of your really good damage. The final really big improvement from the data slate though was to their Quicksilver execution. They basically fixed this rule from a near enough broken rule into a genuinely quite good one. Previously it had the version where you had to advance over an enemy unit, and then if you did so once per game you'd roll a dice, and on a 2+, each biker would deal 2 mortal wounds. So unless you got unlucky and rolled a 1, then you could have say 6 mortal wounds from a squad of 3 of them. The problem with that though is that if you're getting that close, you could have just normal moved and then shot and charged most likely, and those 6 odd mortal wounds were never going to do quite as much damage as the bikers shooting and then charging. So outside of some very specific circumstances, it'd basically be a once per game special rule that actually hurt your damage output if you tried to make use of it. Now though, they changed it so it could work on normal moves as well as just advanced moves, so this now basically becomes a third way that you can deal damage all in the same turn. You could manage to swoop your bikers over the edge of an enemy unit, deal something like 4 or 6 mortal wounds to them if you get lucky, fire at them with a whole bunch of Hurricane Bolters or Salvo launchers, both of which can cause a whole bunch of pain against the right targets, and then go on to charge them with the Interceptor Lances, which as seen are just really very general purpose. Between all that, if they are allowed to do that against some fairly good targets, they could easily make their points back in a single turn, and the mortal wounds could help them out against some of the toughest enemy units around with high saves. While on the subject of Quicksilver execution as well, you absolutely are allowed to move up to an enemy unit and then move back to it, and that can be the way that triggers the mortal wounds, so you don't actually have to fly over and clear them. So provided you've got enough movement to basically move up to the enemy unit and then drop back outside of engagement range, you will be able to use the special rule. It still feels like it might still be a bit opportunistic though, given that you have to move around ruins and things, and often might happen after the opponent's moved up towards your positions or dropped back from the bikers potentially. A lot of the time I suspect you wouldn't be able to make use of it before you go charging for the first time. Overall, between all that, I feel like they've got genuinely quite a lot going for them now. A much better defensive stat line that's no longer quite so far behind some of the rest of the Custodes. Genuinely quite scary shooting depending on the target that you want to attack. Still nice general purpose melee, and a special rule that every so often will be able to throw a bunch of mortal wounds at the enemy and not detract from you doing the other damage. I'd say for weaknesses, still the main one is having to go around ruin walls unlike infantry, and not being quite as durable versus some of the other Custodes on foot. For support options for the units, you could lead them with a jet bike shield captain. They got a few of the same changes, going up to 8 wounds and toughness 7, getting the improved shooting, but unfortunately they went up a big 20 points as opposed to just 5 points. He does feel like really quite a pricey investment still at 160 points, and I don't really think that he's mandatory for the unit. I think initially I'd probably be a bit more tempted to play them without. He does feel like he changes the unit role a bit with the big investment that means they're going to be at minimum 310 points. His special rules are granting the free stratagems, -1 command point to the cost of them when you use them, and also his sweeping advance. That one's the ability to fall back at the end of the fight phase, ideally the opponent's fight phase, so you can go charging straight in on another turn. For costing over double the points of a regular biker though, he only gets the 1 extra interceptor lance attack, so it's not like his melee is much better, and only the +3 wounds, so you are trading off a bit of raw stats for some stratagems and options. Otherwise, for support for the Custodes, a few of the detachments have interesting stuff. As mentioned, the Martial Guitar core rule generally makes more sense to use the sustained hits on the charge, though lethal hits could be good if you're wounded on 5+s after. For the detachments, for the shield host, you can either choose extra AP or critical hits on a 5+. Usually it'll math out that the extra AP could be a bit better against anything that's a 3+ or 2+ save, and the extra AP wouldn't be wasted on an invulnerable save. Usually extra sustained hits is going to be a 20% damage increase for them, and that's be more like a 25% or better. Otherwise, they could have the Castellan's Mark to redeploy units, and both this and the shield host have a fallback shoot and charge stratagem that's rather big. That's quite a nice one given how good their shooting is, plus the extra +1 to wound that they get with their lance keyword attacks. For the Talons of the Emperor, again that stratagem feels like a particularly good one. On top of that, they also have a reactive move stratagem as well, which interestingly, as it's a normal move, could potentially trigger the mortal wound flyby attack. I guess that'd be a bit of a gotcha that would probably make sense to mention to your opponent pre-game, but I'm sure that could be all very disruptive if the opponent moves right up to you and then you use the 1 command points to inflict 6 mortal wounds on them or something, and cut the squad to ribbons that was going to try and take that objective or charge your unit. Finally, in the new Solar Spearhead, they've got a stratagem that allows you to move horizontally through terrain. That feels like it's a really big deal for them, as it shores up pretty much their biggest weakness. It means that you could have them put aggressively forward in a ruin and then use the full amount of that big 12-inch move to get all the way into the enemy lines. I feel like as a result that detachment is significantly better for them, even if that is the main thing that it does for them. I guess they could use the ignore cover when shooting stratagem, which could be nice enough for both profiles, perhaps particularly the bolters with their AP1. Overall, after the changes, it really is quite nice to see one of the core Custodes units get so much better again. I think it does look really quite positive for them. A 7% points increase is something, but not killer. After that, they've gained around about 20-30% extra durability, depending on exactly what they're targeted with. Enormously better shooting, with both options looking pretty viable. The special rule that can actually function now with a chance to deal 2 mortal wounds per bike, as opposed to being a rule that you should probably never use under normal circumstances. And not really losing anything in terms of their good lance melee, that'll still make a nice mess of most targets, and they've got a very good charge threat range if they're not encumbered too much by terrain. I guess for the competition, they're still going to be competing against the mainline Custodes units. I still don't feel like you really want to take all that much away from things like Wardens and Blade Champions to hold the midboard. You still need units that can sit in the open and take a whole bunch of damage, and their threat range can still be very good indeed with their advance and charge that the Blade Champion can give, plus their ability to move through terrain. I guess for fast movers, they might be competing more against the Venatari with their free rapid ingress, and 65 point each for some somewhat similar lance melee, or maybe even Caladius tanks to some extent for a support role. Kind of interesting that with salvo launchers, the bikers basically have around about half the firepower of a Caladius tank into a toughness 10 vehicle target, so it almost feels like you're trading half the firepower for some seriously good melee, but still having at least a little bit of range threat. In any case though, I'd absolutely be expecting some of them to get played in army lists, and good to know for all the people who definitely will have these out there that you're not going to feel like you're holding your army back by putting some in. It'll be interesting to see how many actually turn up in top Custodes lists going forward, whether or not the downsides of the mounted keywords and not quite having the massive toughness of the Wardens does in terms of competing against the other units. In any case though, let me know your thoughts as to the big golden bikers down in the comments. Would you be tempted to put some on the table once again or not? How would you rate them in game with their new points and stats? I'll leave that here for now though. And as mentioned, if you were looking to pick up any 40k models in the near future, the channel's affiliate discount retailers linked in the video description, Element Games in the UK and Gap Games in Australia, Fenris Workshop in Canada, Wargame Portal in the USA, and Tash and the Gale Deep in the EU, all to save a bit of money on the expensive plastic stuff versus GW. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. The channel has a Patreon page linked in the video description if you'd like to support there as well. Perks for that including seeing occasional videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways. So feel free to check that out if you'd like to support or any of that appeals. But otherwise, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.